enter the otherworldly and dissipate into the unknown. You're tuning into 1013, the radio station from hell and back.
Welcome to Channel 1013, dear listeners. I am your storyteller, your music director, your sound against a silent night, and the only light shining in a dark world. This is the darker side, and above all else, I am your host, Herald Gravely. Greetings and welcome to the darker side on 1013. Tonight, we have a lovely episode full of true terror. We'll be reviewing the latest film to join the Conjuring franchise, The Conjuring, Last Rites, as well as discussing the most recent horror release from Bloober Team, Cronos, The New Dawn, and we'll be ending with both a real-life ghost story and music from the Denver punk rock band Better Than Dead. The Conjuring franchise is a horror film universe inspired by the real-life cases of paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. It began with The Conjuring, directed by James Wan of the first Saw film, and expanded into a series of interconnected films, including spin-offs like Annabelle, The Nun, and The Curse of La Llorona. The movies blend supernatural terror, haunted house suspense, and demonic lore, often drawing from alleged true events to create a chilling, shared cinematic universe of possessions, cursed objects, and malevolent entities. Before the fourth entry into the series, I, myself, went back and watched the previous films. For a long time, I was never really a fan of this franchise and its respective counterparts. However, I will provide credit where credit is due. I believe that the first Conjuring film was great for its usage of visuals and visceral scares on such a minimal budget at the time. For the spin-off movie Annabelle, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt that it was much like the first Conjuring film when it was released. But for later entries into the series, including the main series of The Conjuring and the spin-offs like The Nun and La Llorona, I think that fans and I have seen the franchise oversaturate itself, repeating formulas, lacking any new ideas, and overall becoming stale as of late. The original set of films to take the box office around 2013 and for the first few years onward were wonderful for what they were: small budget, indie horror films. But now the franchise has been dwindling. So, where does that leave the latest entry in the series, The Conjuring, Last Rites? Well, to start, if you've seen the trailer, then you know what's mostly in store. A lot of the scares hold true to the same low-budget, yet effective efforts that had been utilized from the beginning for the most part. Some scares, if not most, can be seen coming in from a mile away, of a minute away, as the soundtrack softens and characters stand in place just before the music sting, with a horrifying hand or face appearing where the light or focus of the camera hadn't rested before. It's what we've all come to expect from most horror films these days, and for the most part, Last Rites performs its duties well. Although, it's nothing out of the ordinary, and the tension is typically quickly broken by the scare, without an reminiscence of the terror being able to settle in. It's still an effective method, if not overplayed these days in film. We receive a few callbacks and cameos to other films in the franchise, which I will leave spoiler-free for now, and the stakes are raised to such a high degree that at times it becomes unbelievable that these stories are based on quote, end quote, true events. And even if those events are true to these films, they certainly didn't play out like a trilogy of films. In fact, this series' canon could be compared to the Hobbit franchise by Peter Jackson, where the actual chain of events could have been told in a single film, but Hollywood's greed got the better of the director. The character resolutions are minimal, as well as their growth. The story itself is fairly basic, and Last Rites is as self-explanatory as a movie can be. There's no second-guessing motives or directions. This is simply a popcorn flick for the theaters, or later on streaming. But is The Conjuring, Last Rites, a bad movie? No, it's not a bad movie. But is it a good movie? I think you know the answer. It's great fun if you're into jump scares and unsettling scenes. Even I could appreciate portions of the cinematography, settings, plot, and the acting. The soundtrack is par for what it needs to be, much like the story and characters. But the scares are what you come to the theater to see this film for. Overall, it was fun, but I could have written the script myself. And although there were many interesting shots and settings involved in the framing of scenes throughout this film, it wasn't enough to compare it to other great horror films such as Longlegs or Hereditary, where shot composition was a key element to the storytelling. Go see it if you're bored on a Friday night, or if you have a date that's afraid of horror films. But this'll be one of those movies that you can't stop thinking about for an hour, and you'll forget it by tomorrow. Either way, it's fun for what it is, but it isn't as memorable as it could be. And I, personally, am just glad that we're finally bringing The Conjuring to a close. At least, I hope we are. Bloober Team, founded in 2008 and based in Krakow, is a public game development studio renowned for crafting psychological horror titles rich in atmosphere, storytelling, and mature themes. They've built their reputation through standout works such as Layers of Fear, Observer, Blair Witch, and The Medium, consistently emphasizing immersive experiences with eerie narratives and cinematic design. A major milestone came in 2024 when Bloober Team, in collaboration with Konami, released a critically acclaimed remake of Silent Hill 2, earning widespread praise for revitalizing the classic while remaining true to its haunting tone. Looking ahead, they're expanding both creatively and geographically, planning multiple game projects, partnerships, and new offices globally. One high-profile upcoming title is their original survival horror game, Cronos, The New Dawn, set for release in 2025. This ambitious sci-fi horror combines time travel narratives, resource management, and inventive enemy mechanics in a dark, surreal version of 1980s Poland. In short, Bloober Team is a leading studio in the psychological horror genre, known for cinematic storytelling, atmospheric design, high-profile collaborations, and bold original IP ambitions. But it wasn't always the case for them. When Layers of Fear was first released, it was a stunning innovation into the genre of psychological horror in video games. However, their first horror title wasn't met with only praise. There was plenty of criticism centered around the story, its protagonist, and more. Observer and the Blair Witch games were met with well to mostly mediocre responses, while building the fanbase further. And the wannabe Silent Hill title, The Medium, was well, exactly what I called it. Only it had many underlining issues with, yet again, the protagonist and story that many fans had pointed out. All this left Bloober Team standing along a grey line in the sand. That was until the Silent Hill 2 remake was announced, with Bloober Team unsurprisingly at the head of its development. Many fans following the news surrounding the Silent Hill series, as well as Konami, saw this action from 10 miles out. And many of us Silent Hill fans worried about the future of the series, whether it was a remake or something new. And I was one of these fans, but unlike a select few, I held faithful to Bloober Team. Sure, they never had the cleanest track record, but it seemed as though they had been building towards their involvement in the Silent Hill series since their beginnings with Layers of Fear. And with a long story cut short, let's just say they managed to pull off one of the greatest remakes in video game history since the Resident Evil remakes were being released. The Silent Hill 2 remake was a great success, and that's coming from a fan who's completed it multiple times. Everything they needed to do, they did. And everything they did right. With that said, how has Bloober Team handled Cronos, The New Dawn, a game by their studio that is a mere 11 months separated from their major success, Silent Hill 2? Well, if I were to compare Cronos fairly, I would say it's a pleasant blend of video games like Dead Space, Metro, and Scorn, with a bit of that Silent Hill rust sprinkled into a decaying and broken world. Its main selling point had been the time travel mechanics, but honestly, I find the story and the monsters that infest the worlds you visit to be much more interesting. It feels very familiar most times, walking down narrow corridors, the settings either unnervingly claustrophobic or eerily open. The monsters or enemies of the game, known as orphans, are something from a Lovecraftian story. Their tendrils and morphed appearances scream body horror or cosmic horror. The settings or levels themselves reek of grime and slime. So sorry to rhyme, but right now's the time to elaborate on this well-defined horror title of mine. Again, I'm sorry. With all things considered, and without spoiling any of Cronos, The New Dawn, I want to say that without a doubt that Bloober Team has learned from their mistakes. Although they're working on a remaster for the first Silent Hill game, they somehow found the time to create, explore, and be inspired with a whole other creation that is their own, with the combat feeling smooth yet desperate at times, with the scares being earned more so than not, with the deep, sultry, and unsettling atmosphere involved, as well as a very creative and original story backing the game. I'm more than happy to say that Cronos, The New Dawn, may just be another great horror title to match the Silent Hill 2 remake this year. However, I wonder how well it'll do against the upcoming Silent Hill F, as well as the to-be-announced Resident Evil Requiem. Time will tell, but for now in Cronos, you can travel time and defeat the orphans before more horror titles reach store shelves. And folks, we're about to take a quick music break with Better Than Dead, a Denver, Colorado punk rock group from the local scene, and their song, Along the Way. But before then, I'd like to remind you all of our upcoming true life ghost story. Unlike the Conjuring films, this one is as real as it gets, full of paranormal activity, sudden scares, and is based on my very own experiences while visiting the infamous Third Bridge in Colorado. But until then, let's jam. This is 1013, The Darkerside. Thanks for staying tuned in. This is once again Herald Gravely, and I've got one last story to tell to you, dear listeners. It's a story of teenage naivety, of unexplainable horrors, and deadly consequences by the end. This is my tale of the Third Bridge Incident. Beneath the edge of Bennett's County Line Road lies a span of cracked concrete and graffiti, unassuming by day, but as dusk claims the eastern plains, the Third Bridge drifts into something far more unsettling. By the flicker of twilight, silence deepens into something oppressive, as if the air itself waits to whisper. Locals say the bridge stands within a shadow cast by a history, its soil haunted by the echoes of a settler-native conflict that helped ignite the Sand Creek Massacre. They speak of drums that pulse in the night, distant and disembodied, yet unmistakably alive. A ghostly rider, a weeping girl, or a spectral hand pressing against your window. Tales twist like wind through the drought bed of Kiowa Creek. Ever darker are the tragedies born at the bridge itself. Fatal crashes involving teenagers, most notably a fiery wreck in 1997, and another fatal incident in 2016. Some say their cries still echo when the asphalt seems to whisper beneath slowed tires. Redditors share hands-on experiences. They were always distant, never nailed down the direction. My windshield fogged. A car with one headlight chased me out. Another recalls. One of the cars that passed started to slow down. The ghosts ended up touching my friend's sweatshirts and pulling on clothing. I heard branches snapping and the drumming for a couple of seconds. In a world that dismisses whispers and curses, Third Bridge stands as a nocturnal invitation to sense what lingers just beyond the edge of sight. But our sight was fine. As we gazed across the pitch-black night, our eyes settling with the headlights, looking over the Third Bridge. It was me and a few friends who had all traveled within the same car. Jameson, the driver, had just received the car as a sweet 16th birthday present from his mother, and so he became the designated driver for the rest of us. Fueled up on numerous energy drinks, as high schoolers began to scour the area in search of Indian burial sites or otherwise. For a while, we found nothing but scattered trees swaying in the subtle breeze of the autumn air, with the bridge itself seeming old rather than haunted. But we persisted in our juvenile investigation, having heard stories passed down to us through generations of teenagers and even adults who had terrifying experiences at this site. And not before too long had Jameson shut down his car, his headlights diminishing, and the rest of us left in darkness. This was at a time when phones didn't have good flashlights equipped to them, so we were each struggling to see. But we all followed voices and gathered together, silencing ourselves and listening in. It was nerve-wracking, being huddled in the blackness of midnight at a haunted site supposedly plagued by apparitions and the like. But after some time, we each began to hear the beating of tribal drums sounding off in the distance as the fall breeze turned more bitter, with the wind picking up its pace. I recall one friend screaming and pointing in the distance. Apparently, he had seen a shadow of a man stalking the field nearby. It didn't take long before we all heard footsteps and the crackling of fire surrounding us. That's when we decided to leave. With each of us running back to the car, our driver suddenly had trouble starting the engine. It didn't make sense. The vehicle was basically new, yet the engine wouldn't start. But when it did, and the shine of the headlights came on, Jameson floored the accelerator and sent us flying through empty roads. I recall looking towards his speedometer and reading the number 122. Over and across steep hills, a sudden fog happened to roll in. Although this sounds like a story, I assure you, dear listener, this is the honest truth. And as the fog blocked out the road, driving at speeds over 100 miles in the boonies of eastern Colorado, if we had crashed, then no one would find us until the morning after, if not a day or two later. And as we finally made it past Bennett County, the fog clearing behind us, one last thing of mention shocked us as we all looked to the back windshield. Against the glass, there were two handprints, ones that began to fade as the fog and humidity lifted from the vehicle. However, I myself will never forget those handprints, for I was stationed in the back seat, and I was the one who had heard the drumming first, and I was the one that originally begged the others not to come to Third Bridge, because even before our initial arrival, I had been there before. And in each and every instance, before then and after, I have never left without another terror haunting me. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure weaving tales of terror and speaking on the genre of horror, both in films and in video games. But the night grows ever longer here in Greywater, and I must go for now, lest the evils of this town track me down. But until next time, this is the Darkerside on 1013, and I am your host, Herald Gravely. Your light in the darkness, your sound amongst the silence, and your voice of reason in a world gone mad. This is Herald Gravely, signing off.